Hi, it's Adewale Ademiwa from Stresstherapist.net. Welcome to this free course on how to deal with depression. I once worked with a single mother who had 3 teenage kids. She had spent the last 3 days criticizing herself and lying in her sitting room couch, not able to motivate herself to do anything. She wondered why she couldn't cope with simple everyday tasks like everyone else, and was infuriated that she allowed certain issues she considered useless to bother her so much. She was also very angry with herself for being so negative about everything. For me, though, the one major thing that made it virtually impossible for this single mother to break free from depression was that she was consistently blaming herself for being depressed. This self-blame pattern locked her in a self-feeding negative loop that made her feel worse and worse. But how do you break out of this negative self-feeding loop? In this free video course on depression, I will be sharing strategies that will help to take you from feeling depressed, hopeless, unmotivated, and even self-loathing to a point where you can start to experience pleasure, feeling hopeful, and worthwhile as a person. I do hope you find this course helpful. So, a common wrong assumption I hear from people all the time is that they assume that depression is just a mental health condition. But this couldn't be farther from the truth. To start being more effective at recovering from depression, we need to start thinking of it as a condition that combines psychology and biology. Now, over the course of this 5-part series on depression, I'll be showing you step by step how to manage the different variables that combine together to keep depression going. So I'm going to start with this. The strand that connects biology and psychology, what I've found is stress. But how does that happen? I'd like to take you to the core. And what I mean as the core is related to our early experiences in childhood. And what most therapists will tell you is that problems related to neglect, loss, abuse, being blamed, being criticized, being bullied, all these types of issues are at the core of the problem. But what many people don't often realize that things that may seem as simple as not being praised enough, or not being given proper boundaries, or even overprotection, can also act as the core of depression. So at the middle of this core, we have psychological stress. And what causes these psychological stress are rules that we develop in trying to cope with the pressures in our early lives. For example, if you had people bullying you at school, how you manage yourself at school, the rules you form to try and cope and avoid people who are horrible, forms part of your psychological approach of dealing with things. But these also create stress. Now, what's interesting to note is the biological aspects of stress during the early developmental years. So what has been recently suggested is that between the ages of 0 to 10, we actually can still experience genetic changes that causes us to produce more stress hormones than other people. So within that age, people will experience a higher amount of stress hormones purely because they're having to cope with more difficult situations. And it can be understood because if you're having to deal with more stress, your body has to adapt so that you can cope better. And in that process, your system starts to produce more cortisol. So if you look at this diagram here, you can see how this one here, this one on the left side, represents a person who has experienced a lot of stress during that ages 0 to 10. You can see that a high level of cortisol compared with someone who hasn't had that much stress during that time. There's a low level of cortisol. So in other words, what I'm saying here is, because of the pressures of life in those early stages, you start off with a higher level of cortisol than other people would, which means you are highly sensitized to stress and more risk focused, more negative focused. Another crucially important point to mention here is that starting off with more stress hormones in your system than other people by default means that you will tend to hit your coping threshold a lot sooner than other people who haven't been through similar early life experiences like yours. So how can you begin to use the information in this video now? Number one, it is important to recognize that many other variables other than yourself have come together to make you who you are today. It's not all just your fault. And number two, take a look back at the issues in your core. What coping rules have you formed because of those issues? These coping rules are often at the core of the difficulties that keep your depression ongoing. You need to become aware of these coping rules, as they will need to be modified later in this course.